The mainstream narrative is that there is no cure for schizophrenia. It's an absolutely hopeless situation, and you have to be on big pharma drugs your entire life, and basically your life is over. Your entire life will just be, drugged out, subdued, battling these voices. And that was when Jerry encountered the most resistance in his career. And it wasn't a religious thing or anything like that. He just started listening to his patients, and they started to get better. And when the establishment noticed, the places that he worked noticed, why are your patients getting better? Why are they getting off the medication? Why are they, that's impossible. What are you doing? So they started, spying on him and all of this stuff, like he was doing something wrong because his patients were actually getting better. And that is the message of hope here, and the message that Jerry Marzinsky is trying desperately to get out to the world. He also is co-author of a book titled An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind, Breaking the Spell of the Ivory Tower. I will put links to that below. I will also put links to a free PDF file of his advice to families and people struggling with schizophrenia, different treatments, free PDF file, and I'll put the link to his website, which is jerrymarzinsky.com. Okay, beyond just Jerry's research, for people who have followed my research and my channel, I want to read this little book synopsis here, and you'll know why it's important that we listen to Jerry's life experience and his medical experience. Because although we've all come from completely different perspectives coming at this thing, coming toward the truth, you can see that he's come to basically the same conclusion that we have come to. So here's the back of the book write-up. Psychiatry maintains the voices schizophrenics hear are meaningless auditory hallucinations caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain. Actual clinical investigation into the matter reveals this to be a false claim. Dr. Wilson Van Dusen, a clinical psychologist and author of The Presence of Spirits in Madness, began holding coherent conversations with the voices of his schizophrenic patients decades ago. He discovered they precisely matched what Christian mystic Emanuel Swedenborg described as quote-unquote evil spirits. Following up with scores of investigative interviews with his own schizophrenic patients, Jerry Marzinsky verified Van Dusen's astonishing conclusion. The voices are real. They are conscious. They are parasitic entities. So those of you who have watched my channel and everything that we've been talking about this last couple years about these parasites, these nanoparasites, these neural links into the brain, you can see why I think it's so important that we have medical verification from the psychiatric community for what we are saying. Okay, so let's get to it. Speaking of that, because I want to talk about my deliverance from some of these. So let's get into that supernatural experience that you had with, you were in was it the penitentiary? I think you were working with prisoners then. And this one gentleman, you'd been working with him for a while, and he told you had made the voices so angry that they were like going to get you. And then in your office, and this was the first time you said that you had never had a quote unquote like supernatural experience with one of these entities, but you said, just tell us the story and what you saw happen. Oh, sorry, I knocked my computer back. And what you saw actually happen in your office.
Well, there was a progression to that. So, the voices are running these patterns, and let me quickly go through them because they're the same for virtually all. So if they're running patterns, they're not hallucinations. Hallucinations don't run these patterns, and you can see for yourself. You talk to a schizophrenic, he'll be running these patterns. So they foster isolation. They want the person away from everybody. They want them alone. They want them in their room. They don't want any interference with the bullcrap they're feeding them. They demand the attention of their victims. It's a constant fight for the attention of the victim. They maneuver for increased control over the victim constantly. They'll gaslight them. They manipulate perception. They have complete access to the schizophrenic's memory. They demand the victim not tell anybody about their presence. What's interesting is, for the most part, they're stunned by the snap of a rubber band. So if you put a rubber band around your wrist and you snap it, that seems to shock them.
Huh.
And they shut up for a short while, just long enough to get the person to repeat the 23rd Psalm, which they hate with a passion. The voices are consummate liars. You can't be trusted to keep any bargain or tell the truth about any. You can't trust them. You know?
Mm-hmm.
So that's important to know, because anything they tell you is likely to be a lie. They get louder when they're ignored. They constantly steer their victim away from anything that might generate joy. They can manipulate feeling without speaking, and they short-circuit reason. They pass themselves off as thoughts belonging to the victim. They thrive in boredom. They will cause selective forgetting, and they will fill the victim's mind with negative thoughts about themselves and others. They destroy any positive self-concept the person has. They'll attempt to pull the victim away from consensual reality, which is the reality we walk around in most of the time. Voices, they use confusion as a means of instilling negative suggestions, kind of like a hypnotist almost. They're averse to anything positive or beautiful. Any attempt to inform the schizophrenic patient that the voices are energetic parasites, draining them will trigger a volatile reaction consistently. Okay, so those are the patterns. And you can see these for yourself. Don't believe me, go talk to a schizophrenic and ask him, hey man, are the voices doing this to you? And they'll tell you. You know. So what I did is I started interfering with these patterns. You know, and the big one was the lies, because they were always telling these patient lies. and you know, I'm like, why do you listen to them? You know they're liars. They lie to you all the time. You know, why do you even listen to them? Why do you believe them? Every time you listen to them, you got into trouble. Why do you even pay attention to them? You know, oh, because they're so damn real. You know. So I started interfering with these patterns, starting with the most prominent all the way down. And then I started getting reports from the patients I was working with in the prison that the voices were getting pissed at me because they didn't like what I was doing. And they didn't like the patients following through with the homework and doing stuff to interfere with them. So here I started getting all these reports like, hey, the voices are really getting pissed with you, you know, and I'm like, why? So it went from there to the next step was one patient, as he's leaving my office, he stops in the doorway and he turns around and he says, you know what you're doing is very dangerous, don't you? And I looked at him like, what do you mean? You know, I was like, I just staring at him like, what? No, I don't know what it's dangerous. Why do you even say that? And then he turns around and leaves. And I'm sitting there going, why do you say that? And you know, I'm like, it didn't even cross my mind that he might do something to me. That didn't even cross my mind. But you know, I got that, and then that same guy comes back maybe 2 weeks later. He's still working on stuff. He's still making progress, and he goes, the voices want to talk to you. And I'm like, they want to talk to me personally? And he goes, yeah, they want to talk to you personally. He comes to my office without an appointment, the psych office. So, well, come on in, tell me what they have to say. And that never happened before. It was always the patient would tell me what they were saying. And I would tell the patient, well, tell them to go stick their heads in a toilet or something. You know, it was like, you know, that kind of stuff. But, you know, we sat down and I'm looking at him like, okay, tell me. What do they want to tell me? And he goes, this is what they want to tell you. And these words came out of his mouth. It said, you have no right to interfere with our way of life. And I'm looking at him like, do. It's like Twilight Zone. And
did it sound like his voice? It didn't, or did his voice change at all?
It was like his voice, but it changed tone just a little bit. Mm-hmm. You know, just barely noticeable. And I'm looking at him, I'm stunned. And he goes, that wasn't me, that was them. You know, and, you know, I had some, you know, I wasn't thinking straight. I was like, you know, it kind of blew my mind. And he's saying, that wasn't me, that wasn't me, that was them. I'm just telling you what they were saying. It wasn't me. And I'm looking at him, and I sensed he was telling the truth. And, you know, I'm blown away. I'm stunned. And I don't know I don't even remember what I said back to him. But after he left, I just sat there staring into space. That's when my whole denial system just collapsed right then. I mean, it was tattered. It was beat up. I had a lot of evidence that these things weren't separate. You know, they were separate entities, but I didn't want to believe it. I just didn't want to believe it. And this did it. You know, after that, it was like, okay, they are separate entities. They're not some figment of his imagination. They're not the subconscious. This is a separate entity. This is a separate identity. This is something individual, separate from the person who was talking to me. And I just closed my office and stared out the window for the rest of the day. You know, it was like, you know, what the hell am I getting myself into? What is going on here? But I didn't stop working with these guys. I mean, I just kind of shook it off. And then about 2 to 3 weeks later with this same guy, here I'm reading this book, Miguel Ruiz's, he's a shaman. It was The Voice of Knowledge. And in there, they were talking about parasitic entities. And that's one of the things I suspected these things were, because all the patients were telling me when they hit, they drain my energy. It's gone. You know, it's consistent. There's a one-to-one correlation between the appearance of the voices and the draining of their energy. And some of them were so drained at the end of the night, they couldn't even get out of bed. They couldn't even get up to eat breakfast. So it was a major drain. And I had, for years, I didn't know what was causing that. I thought it was the anxiety of listening to these things, but it turned out that wasn't it at all. That broke too later on. But I kept working with this guy. He started getting better and better. The voices started getting less and less. They came less often. They weren't as strong. And I'd read this about there being parasitic entities. So I brought that book into the prison, and I said, you know, I've been wondering about this, to the same guy. And I said, I want to read it to you and tell me what you think about what this guy's saying. So I started reading, and as soon as I hit the part where they were parasitic entities, this guy goes into a zombie stare. You know, he's just staring at me. He's sitting there silently, just staring at me with this blank stare. And I'm looking at him like, what's going on? And, you know, I'm just staring at him. He's staring at me. And then all of a sudden, from behind my head is this loud crackling, like a arc welder. It was like crackle, 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 crack, 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 crack. And I'm like, what the hell? And I turn around and I see nothing. And I look at him, and he's just staring at me like a zombie. And this thing starts moving to my right, to the wall, my office wall to the right, and then starts moving at a 45-degree angle up toward the opposite end of the office, up toward the ceiling. And I can't see anything. I can't smell anything. It sounded just like my arc welder, you know, crack, 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 all the way up the wall. You could hear it moving. And I'm looking at him, and he's just staring at me. And I'm like, something's wrong. Something's wrong. So I pushed my chair against the wall, because all they had in the psych office, the medical unit, was a female guard. You know, you know, that wouldn't have done any good. You're basically on your own. So, you know, I pushed my chair against the office wall, and in case this guy came at me, at least I could kick him back, and I wouldn't go scooting across the you know, the room and falling over. So I got in a position where I could defend myself. And he's staring at me, and I asked him, I said, do you hear that? And he's just staring at me. He doesn't say anything. It's like he's frozen in time. And he's just got this blank stare as this thing is crackling. And then you know, I didn't want to take my eyes off him very long, but I'm looking where this noise is, and finally it starts crossing the office wall, the back office wall up to near the ceiling, and it's crackling all along. So I could see him, and I could hear where the crackling's coming from at the same time. So I'm looking at it. I don't see anything. I don't smell anything. I don't feel anything. It just shouldn't be. This doesn't happen. This stuff just doesn't happen, and it's moving. So he's staring at me the whole time, and then it starts coming down the left wall, and it's moving toward me, and I'm like, what's happening here? And I'm darting my attention between him and this noise, and then it jumps into this Rubbermaid trash can right at my left leg. So I look down in there, and it's empty. It's totally empty, and this thing's crackling in there for a few seconds, and it had been cleaned by the inmate porter the night before. There's nothing in there, and then it stops.
And you never saw any sparks or anything? It was just the noise, but
nothing.
you could
Saw nothing, no feel anything. I didn't see anything. Oh, I heard it, and then he gets up very slowly, and he goes, "I gotta leave," and he shuffles out, and I'm like, "Yeah, get the hell out of here, go!" Go. I couldn't get him out of there fast enough, and I was totally relieved after he left, and I'm like scared shitless. I'm like, what the hell just happened? So I go out in the hallway, and I'm checking all the office doors. After I traced back the pattern of the crackling to see if the office was burned or there was any burn marks or anything. No, there was nothing. Nothing. You couldn't tell anything had ever happened. And so I go check all the office doors. I go check the doctor door across from me. I go check the nurses' doors. They're all locked. I was the only one in the medical unit at that time, except for the guard, the front. And I was so bent out of shape that, again, I locked up my office, I canceled all my appointments, and I stared out the window for the rest of the day, and kind of went, what am I getting into? What just happened? And I couldn't talk to anybody about it. I couldn't even talk to my wife about it because she didn't like me messing with these guys in the first place. So there was nobody to talk to. The only person I could talk to is this guy, who understood them. But I was so bent out of shape that I didn't call that guy back for probably 3 months.
Oh my goodness.
I didn't want to see him. And then finally,
imagine,
my curiosity got the best of me, and I finally put out a pass for him to be brought to the psych office. Probably 3 months later, he shows up and he's looking good. I figured he'd be a wreck. I figured he'd be an absolute wreck. If whatever this was came out of him, it was strong enough to cause whatever this crackling. But, if it could affect physical reality like that, it had to be strong. But, he comes in, he's walking, he's looking good. He's got good energy. And I'm like, why isn't he a wreck? So I thought, I said, what? You look good. What's going on? He goes, well, I've been practicing the stuff you told me, and I'm able to keep them under control, but I haven't beat them yet. So we did some small talk, and finally I said, you remember the last time you were in the office here? I said, did you hear that crackling that moved around the office? And he goes, yeah, I heard it, but I was surprised you did. And I said, what the hell was that? And he said, that was them. And I said, them who? He said, that was the voices. And I said, well, what the hell were they doing? He said, they were trying to scare you. I said, well, they did one hell of a job of it. And I said, I said, you had this strange look on your face as you left my office. You looked like a zombie. And I said, what were you thinking? What were the voices telling you at that time? And he looked at me, calm as anything. And he goes, well, they were telling me to go get a shank and stick it in your belly. The shank is a homemade prison knife. Yeah. And I'm like, I'm like, whoa, that's what he meant by what you're doing is dangerous.
Wow.
And then I asked him, I said, well, why didn't you do it? I'm thinking, well, I worked with him for 6 months. We know each other really well. I've watched out for him. He's told me a bunch of stuff. He's not going to do something like that. And I asked him, well, just out of curiosity, I said, well, why didn't you do it? And he looks me straight in the eye very calmly, and he says, I couldn't find one. And then he turns around and walks away. I'm like sitting there going, what in the hell am I getting myself into here? I was stunned. And there was nobody to talk to, nobody. I couldn't go to the chief psychologist and say, hey, man, I was talking to a schizophrenic and the office walls started crackling. I'd end up in one of the cells myself.
So how long was it before you started talking openly about this? Were you already retired when you finally started to open up?
Well, no. What Robert Stanley, I don't know how he got wind of me. Maybe something I wrote. I don't remember. But he calls me up and he goes, I want to do a podcast with you on my show. And I said, I'm still working. And he goes, well, I'll make up a alias for you. And I said, okay, no videotaping, alias, just my voice. And he goes, yeah, that's what we'll do. And so it's okay. I'll do that because I know they'd fire me. I mean, I have no idea they'd go after me. No doubt. And so he put it out there. I didn't come out with anything until I had retired. Other than that, and then other people started asking me to talk, and I did so as long as who I wasn't exposed, because they would go after you. I have no doubt that they would go after me. None.
Yeah, well, we're seeing that now with the medical community, like we were talking about going after people's licenses and stuff. There's absolutely no doubt. But thank you for coming out and sharing all of this now for everybody. I mean, it's so rare to find anybody brave enough to challenge the system or to come out and say, especially talking about something supernatural like this, that you had a disembodied encounter with one of these energy entities. I mean, that's, for somebody to say that, it takes bravery. It really does. So I appreciate it.
Oh, well, it's been quite a trip. It's been one hell of a trip. It's and then when we got to the point where we could get rid of these things, I mean, it was absolutely amazing. That you can get rid of them but what psychiatry is doing, it's like, okay, you get a magnet, you get those iron filings, and it's you see the outline of the energy, and then they get drugs and they pour it on there, and they're trying to drug an energetic field. It just doesn't work. The voices are of an entirely different universe. They're of the energy universe. There is no time. There is no space. There is no matter there. That's why they can go into the person's mind and pull whatever memories they have and bring them to their awareness, because thoughts are energetic. These voices are energetic. They play by a whole different set of rules.
Yeah, I mean, it's my opinion and many other people's at this point that the people at the at the highest tiers, they of course do know, like we said, the MK Ultra levels, the Black Ops levels of the military and stuff. They do know, and they want us to be avatars, to be hosts for these parasites. They don't want. It's almost like we've been turned over to them. But I think down, like you said, all of your peers and entrenched contemporaries and stuff, I don't think they're aware. I don't think everybody's aware of it. I think it's so compartmentalized, like you said. At the regular people levels, they're just following the textbook.
Well, let's look at it at the macroscopic level. These patterns that the voices are telling schizophrenics are identical to what the deep state, mainstream media, psychiatric mafia, Biden and all the rest of them are telling them. Look at it. Negativity, anti-religious, They stop people from going to churches. They in Canada, they don't tried to arrest one of the preachers. They foster negative emotion. Turn on the television. You don't have enough negative emotion, it'll pour out of there for you. They drain their victims. You're constantly bombarded with this negative bull crap. You can't ignore them. They get louder when they're ignored. They foster self-destructive behavior. Look at what they're doing. Lock yourself up. Stay away from your family. Stay away from your friends. Isolate yourself.
It's exactly, I said that
exactly the same thing. It's exactly the same thing.
Went live to the masses. They isolate you from your friends and family. Then they bombard you with all the, like you said, the guy who he was just staying drunk and drugging and fishing and stuff. Like, that's what alcoholism went through the roof during the isolation. They're constantly pumping perversion into us, every way they can. And what do we have? We have an epidemic of chronic fatigue. They're like, oh, it's COVID. We have an epidemic of depression, an epidemic of suicide, all of these things that you say these entities are pushing on the patients that you dealt with. Now it's live to the masses. I mean,
it's on a macroscopic scale.
It's terrifying. I mean, hopefully people will, like I said, we are experiencing an awakening. Speaking of that, I want to tell my story. This is when I heard your story, it was so, talking about the crackling and the electricity. It was exactly, you were the only person at that point that I had ever heard tell exactly what happened to me alone in my home when I got saved. And so as far as this is my take on getting rid of these things permanently, that I was home alone in my house and I was tormented. This was 25 years, more than 25 years ago. And I was in a really self-destructive lifestyle. I was bartending and partying all the time, and I was just miserable. And my family was just being attacked, like not my personal family, like me and my husband, that thing, but like my brothers, my parents, like it was just like a full-on spiritual battle. It was so painful.
That's what it is.
I'm not going to go into like all the details, but it was destroying everything.
Yep.
But it came to a point where I had my coming to Jesus meeting, I call it. I was alone in my home. I wasn't in a church. And I was crying. I was pacing through the house, just kind of shaking my fist at God. If you loved people, why would you let this happen? Why, my parents are good people. Why won't you help them? And and I was just really giving it to him. And after I got done throwing my tantrum and I got all of that out, then I just fell to my knees. I was exhausted. Like I had thrown my tantrum like a little kid and it was over. And I fell down to my knees and I was crying. And from the most sincere place in my heart, I just said, God, save me. Like, I can't get free from this. I need help. Like, you've got to intervene. Save me. I surrender. What do you want from me? I'll do it. I'll do it. Whatever you want. And it was like there was a spiritual battle in the atmosphere, and it was exactly what you described. It sounded like crackling leaves, like rustling leaves in the wind, and like static electricity. Kind of, it was, like a weird sound I couldn't put my fingers on. But at the same time that was going on, there was this like sound of rushing wind. It was like there was a battle between this electricity and this wind, and it was so loud, Jerry. I was scared. I went out. It was so loud. I went out on the front porch to see if like cars were pulled over or if anybody outside, if I could hear it outside. Like it was so loud. It was real. And it was electricity and it was crackling and, and I stepped back in off the porch and I shut the front door and I said, Jesus, is that you? And the instant that I said, Jesus, it was gone. Like when I said that name, like a light switch. Here it was going on, and it was so loud, and the crackling and the electricity. And then the instant I said Jesus, it was almost like that exorcism movie where they say that they heard the lightning clap or the thunder clap. It was like that sudden, and it was gone. Like that was it. And then I sat down, and I was like you know, like I was just in shock. Like,
Yeah.
nobody's gonna believe this. I
Right.
wasn't religious. I never went to church. I didn't know anything like this was real. I'd never heard of anything like this. And I found out after I got saved. I went to church, neither did they. I went to church and they're like, no, that doesn't happen. There's no real, like, none of that's real. We're just gonna go eat some fried chicken. And I'm like, what? Like, this really happened. I was so let down by organized religion. When that thing left me, all of the desires that were its went with it.
Yeah.
And like you said, I thought they were my desires.
Right.
Like, I thought my taste in music, my taste in clothing, because I dressed like a hooker at the bar, everybody did. And my taste in clothing, my taste in music, my behavior, all of it was it. Like,
Yeah.
it went with it. I didn't
Yep.
have to, like, religiously, like, I'm gonna be good now and I'm gonna change. No, it was gone. Like, all of those desires were gone. I was shocked. I really thought they were mine. I really thought that was
Yeah.
me.
Yep.
It
So
was
there you go.
so
You've
crazy.
experienced it.
Right. And that's like, for me, I know exactly what you're talking about. And a lot of people who have been delivered, truly delivered, not for show, but had a
Yeah.
true deliverance, a true spiritual deliverance from these things. We know, like I said, it's real. You can be free. Like, you can actually be free of these things. Mine wasn't schizophrenia, but it was still these spiritual parasites. They were getting the upper hand,
Well, they hit us all. I mean, who hasn't had you're walking along the sidewalk, minding your own business, and all of a sudden this horrible thought comes to mind,
Yeah.
or beat up your boss or something,
But that's the problem, is a lot, like you said, a lot of people who are dealing with this stuff, they don't want to tell anybody because they don't want to get put on a bunch of meds or
Oh
put in,
yeah.
because
Yeah.
nobody will be frank that this is normal. These entities are real. We're in a spiritual battle. You have to, like the Bible says, take every thought captive. It also says test the spirits to see whether they are of God. So this is part of our reality. But people, they're living through this and struggling through it. And, some of their pet demons are ganging up on to where they become the pet and the demons are in charge.
And you don't see psychiatry or psychology asking, where do thoughts come from? They won't touch that. They won't touch it. But, the crux is there. Everything is motivated by thought. Everything in physical reality was a thought first. Everything around you was a thought before it came into physical reality. If you want to get to the crux of things, where do thoughts come from? Now, Manuel Swedenborg answered that 700 years ago. He was a Christian mystic, and he had access to heaven and hell, and he would go and he'd spend time in heaven and he'd spend time in hell, and then he'd come back and write about it.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was, years ago, I was reading Swedenborg's work, and I'm reading about the evil spirits, and they were exactly the same as these voices that the schizophrenics were hearing. And then I found there was a PhD clinical psychologist called Wilson Van Dusen, who was working in a psychiatric hospital in Northern California. And he was a Swedenborgian. And after this incident with the voice saying, you have no right to interfere with our way of life, I had to find this guy. And I didn't even know if he was still alive. So I finally caught up to him. It took a while, and he was leery because nobody else had dealt with this. And I finally sent him some emails and said, listen, this is what I'm experiencing. It's very similar to what you're experiencing. And then we got to talking for almost a year. Yeah, everything is preceded by thought. All behavior is preceded by thought. You want to change behavior, you have to change the thoughts that come into, your mind is your brain, not your mind. Your brain is like the CPU in a computer. Your body is like the keyboard, so you have the input. It's the processor. It's almost like if natives saw an explorer playing a radio, and they hear this voice coming out of the radio. So they take the radio apart and they're looking for the man who's singing, and they don't
Yeah.
see him. You know, it's like, you know, they can't see the radio waves. They can't see the electricity. That these are energetic facets of the energetic universe.
That's the analogy I always use, is the radio, that the brain is like the radio. We're receiving
Right.
thoughts. Like the mainstream teaches that we only are creating the thoughts. Like it's all us. And
No.
I'm like, no,
They don't
no,
come
we're
from, they don't come from
thoughts.
us. You know,
Yeah.
like you were saying, the angel and the devil on your
Yeah.
on your 2 show. There's that's exactly what's happening.